have to say, I'm getting pretty hyped for that Furiosa movie on May 24th. It's been far too long since I last saw George Miller's epic kookiness. So, to get my fill of road rage till Furiosa drops, I hopped back into the driver's seat and took the whole film series for a spin, rewatching Mad Max, which I remembered very little of, then seeing the series come into its own with Road Warrior, and then spin out a bit into the Spielberg schlock of Beyond Thunderdome before bringing it home with the delectable Fury Road for the fourth time.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
But I knew my hype journey wouldn't be complete without diving back into the 2015 Mad Max game by Avalanche Studios. And would you looky there, that Skag Lover was $5 reduced on the Xbox store. You know what happened next. I played the game pretty close to release back in 2015, and I remember loving the satisfying crunchiness of its Batman Arkham-like fighting system and Rage-like car combat if it were, good. But I do remember getting quite tired of the grind to acquire resources, and I really tapped myself out on seeing all the game had to offer. So Mad Max stayed a momentary but pleasant distraction in the grand scheme of my gaming career, though I made it a point to shout it out if I could. And if you go to any subreddit these days, you'll find a host of people who never miss a chance to call it underrated. One person even called it the Batman Arkham Asylum for Mad Max, meaning it was the definitive game adaptation for the character. I even recently spoke with native Australian Gmanlives about his changing attitude on the game, and here's a bit of what he had to say.
Mad Max was an interesting title for me. I mean, as someone who's a big fan of the films, and also someone who lives literally 15 minutes away from where they filmed parts of that first movie, it's something that I should have absolutely loved. The funny thing is, though, the first time I played it, something about it just didn't seem to gel. I don't know if it was because 2015 was such a gangbuster year for open world games, but either way, my first playthrough was pretty underwhelming. The thing is, though, when I went back to play through it again a few years later, it was like a completely different experience.
Nice. But as I went back in with the reviewer's mindset for my own second playthrough, I got to live out some of the same highs as G-Man notes here, but I was also more keenly aware of the quality of what I was playing this time around. Is Mad Max actually underrated, or simply just a decent game rated exactly as it should be with his unimpressive but certainly not horrible 6.9 on Metacritic, just to give you some context? So let's get stuck in like a shiv and find out whether Mad Max is worth its weight in scrap and whether it's actually as good as we remember.
When do we go for a ride?
Would you believe that in 45 years of Mad Max being a franchise that only 2 licensed games have ever been produced? Obviously the 2015 game is one of them, but the last one was quite a long time ago. 1987's Mad Max Autorama was the first attempt we know of, and it was conceived as an on-rails shooter where gameplay was basically FMV footage of real cars driving along. It was supposed to make you feel like you're playing a movie, and it would use VHS tapes for the Control Vision console that Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak had a hand in. But when Hasbro somehow missed that Mad Max wasn't family friendly, what? They scrapped the project, and the console soon followed suit. Womp womp. So it wasn't until 1990 that we got our first proper Mad Max game from Mindscape Games, and it kinda controls like Bartertown pig shit if you ask me. It didn't review very well either for that exact reason, and also the punishing limits on your resources, which is kind of an immersive, ironic way to go. Mindscape tried their luck again with the first-person perspective Outlander in 1992 for the Sega Genesis, but they lost the license close to release, hence the name change. Outlander let you drive around blasting bikers with your shotgun until you ran out of fuel, and then had to scrounge for fuel on foot, avoiding the bad guys as you went. Mad Max Asylum was conceived as a sequel to Beyond Thunderdome and got a concept trailer in 1999, but went nowhere further when Mad Max creator and director George Miller shot it down. So despite inspiring nearly every major post-apocalyptic property like Wasteland, Fallout, Borderlands, and Rage, and even movies like Waterworld, Max hadn't seen the inside of a game console or a PC hard drive in 25 years, nor the inside of a movie theater in 30 years, until 2015 saw Fury Road and the self-titled game come out within a couple months of each other. But just like the rough development of those previous games, the 2015 game took quite an arduous road to completion. As early as 2008, George Miller was working with Cory Balrog of God of War fame. Wait, Cory Balrog? George Miller was working with Cory Barlog of God of War fame to make a game that would coincide with his upcoming Fury Road movie. In fact, Miller was so set on the two properties releasing alongside each other that he delayed the movie's shooting schedule to match the game's production schedule. Years passed, and Balrog left Avalanche, and a movie tie-in that may or may not have been this early project was introduced and then promptly done away with. So it was a bit strange when out of nowhere Avalanche Studios reappeared in 2013 as the developer of a new Mad Max game, in a tweet with this goony-ass blurred screenshot where they're all like, yo, 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 we out here making a Mad Max game after all. Remember us? Turns out they'd gotten George Miller's input on or around 2011, but had been given fairly free rein since by publisher Warner Brothers to make the game they wanted to, and they did, taking quite a bit of inspiration from Miller's early design documents for Fury Road and putting some of the stuff in their game that didn't make the movie. On the plus side, there wasn't any specific baggage from previous games that developer Avalanche Studios had to compete with, and they had free rein to indulge all their fanboy fantasies. But there was the very big elephant in the room that nearly every single game franchise that Max had inspired had also ironically pretty much played out all of its post-apocalyptic tropes by the time this 2015 project came out. So Avalanche simply did the best thing possible. Ignore all the other games, don't try to compete with them, just stay as true to the Mad Max spirit as possible without overdoing or underdoing it. What we got is a really interesting synthesis of all the best parts of the Mad Max movies up to and including Fury Road, and that's most evident in the characters but also the main character, the Wasteland itself. Much like the movies, Avalanche's Max is a man of few words.
What do you want?
Gruff and standoffish at times, and tortured by his family's death and in a state of recurring mental self-exile, though he doesn't want to get involved and care too much about anything else ever again. And of course, inevitably, he runs into some people who need his talents, and he finds his will to care reignited, if only for a brief spell. In keeping with most Mad Max movies, the best character is always Max's sidekick. That's the case here with Chumbucket, the lovable mutant hunchback mechanic who's got a sexual and religious fascination with engines.
Yeah, praise be! You found it! The sacred shaft of undying torque! Oh, give me one of these babies, and I will twist nuts like never afore!
This guy's kind of like post-apocalyptic Gollum, who's reliable as long as you don't threaten any of his car creations. He's so entertaining, though, and just down for whatever that you can't help but love him. He's also referenced in the new Furiosa script, I hear, so supposedly that kind of makes this game canon as well, although of course canon in Mad Max is a loose approximation of the term at best. The rest of the characters you'll meet, like Gutgash, Deep Frya, and Pink Eye, are pretty likable too, well voice acted and memorably designed, especially Frya's beer cap from hell. It's too bad, though, that they're essentially just figureheads to dress up hub areas, called strongholds, and they're only given a couple cutscenes each to bookend fetch quests. Our villains are good fun, too, Stank Gum especially with his horrible meat mask and Joker-like unpredictability, but his boss, Scabrous Scrotus... Yeah, I know, we'll get to that. But his boss, Scabrous Scrotus, is pretty undercooked in my opinion, feeling like a generic guy in leather with big weapon that is mean that so many Mad Max baddies often fall into. The plot could have done more to build up these baddies too, so the ending hit a lot harder. So let's talk about it, or more accurately, let's hear Griffa, the mystical traveling merchant, narrate the beginning of our tale.
His was a never-ending journey away from the phantoms of his past. He believed he could silence the cacophony in his mind and find peace beyond a place he called the Plains of Silence. He now had the vehicle, the weapons, the provisions and the fortitude. He only needed the fuel. And here, there was but one place to go for fuel. Gastown.
He then runs into Scabrous Scrotus, who we learn is actually the son of Immortan Joe, the villain from Fury Road. And while it's unconfirmed, there is some scuttlebutt that this game picks up where the movie left off, with Scabrous looking to avenge his father's death, hence the game's opening fight scene where Max puts a saw blade in Scrotus' head. When Max's V8 Interceptor is taken by scavengers and destroyed, the little weirdo Chumbucket vows to make him a masterpiece car to fulfill his quest. This is the impetus we need to go out into the wasteland to find parts to improve our vehicle till it's ready to make the journey to the Plains of Silence, and this gets Max and Chumbucket caught up in all the politics and infighting of the various factions in the region until Max realizes he can't turn away and must start lending his aid. But along the way is of course our gameplay and game world, and we'll go into story spoilers a bit later. So without a doubt, the Wasteland is the main character of Mad Max, the Vigia game. It's sprawling, moody, and intensely beautiful in an understated but profound way. I still can't fathom how something this hollowed out and barren can still feel so real and look so incredible, but just look at the skyboxes here, the bloom and the cloud cover. There's trash and debris and ruin everywhere, and no matter how much of it there is, it always feels organically placed. Whatever it is, I don't get how I never once felt like I wasn't firmly rooted in a real place. My Australian buddy Hey Blondie actually has some personal connections to this place and really drives home the game's authenticity.
I can't play Mad Max without feeling a pang of youthful nostalgia. I grew up in the outback desert in a place as decayed and time-worn as Mad Max's setting. The dust-bitten dirt tracks, lined and compacted by years of rubber. The roiling dust storms looming like Uluru on the horizon until they crash across the land with sand-blasted fury. The rusted remains of old 60s pickups whose metal is so pitted and worn that it flakes at the touch.
That's pretty cool, right? Even native Australians can still feel a sense of authenticity here. Now, that sense of reality can mean that there's a lot of dead space in the world just like in real life, and there definitely can be in this game. It's so chock full of stuff to do, and getting to it can be a chore sometimes with some of it being so far apart. I also just can't get over how good the fire and explosions and weather effects look. One of the most terrifying things that happen are those sandstorms and lightning storms. Sandstorms just suck, kicking up sand and damaging you and your car gradually, and you're required to wait them out under shelter. But lightning storms are downright terrifying. Bolts cracking across the sky and down into your vehicle, sending sparks everywhere, and sometimes disintegrating you or your enemies. Check this poor bastard out. So yeah, that's the breadth of what you're dealing with on a basic environmental level, but of course there are more consistent worries than the weather. There are hot air balloons you can go up to reveal parts of the map in a very Ubisoft way. These reveal tons of different camps housing the various gangs that occupy different sectors of the map. They also reveal vehicle convoys that patrol certain roads and attack anyone who gets near them, and sniper nests that keep intruders out. There are also minefields out in the wild you need to disarm, and big gang monuments called scarecrows that you can knock down to decrease their influence in a region. There are 2 or 3 types of races you can do too, but these always make you use these shitty default car builds that are either too weak or too slow to really have very much fun with, so I ended up skipping these a lot. There's even a leaderboard type race too that you could do if it weren't for the fact that the servers are no more. Dang it! Now, as you're doing story missions, you'll gradually unlock Wasteland missions, which usually unlock an important upgrade like increasing how fast Chumbucket can repair your vehicle or something similar. These show promise at first and often have a cool cutscene and contextual setup for what you're doing, but they usually just end up being fetch quests inside of some cool crafted zones, and quite a few of them glitched out for me and took multiple tries of fighting through these glitches to complete, so they're not much more than a means to getting what you need to do the fun stuff like taking down the Far Cry-like camps. Speaking of camps, taking them down is the most important thing you'll do. These have a lot of different configurations and are often fortified with snipers or explosive turrets, and sometimes you'll need to talk to scouts nearby to figure out secret ways in to avoid these or to take out these defenses preemptively. Once you get in, you'll often be taking on hordes of bad guys and have to contend with a battle cry guy who buffs them if you don't take him out first. There are often multiple floors and multiple types of objectives, so you've usually got a pretty good mix of configurations that you can plow through so that none feel exactly the same from camp to camp. Some of them are just basic silos that you go between, some are even on top of a bridge, which is really cool. And once you're done clearing these, you're often blowing up fuel reserves or something at the end to take them out, and then you start earning a scrap injection from them about every 20 minutes in game. Now pretty much no matter what you're doing, you're always looking to increase your reserves of scrap. Scrap in Mad Max is your currency, represented by various car parts lying around in, gosh, a zillion places. Scrap is all over the place in very small amounts, so you're really scraping by a lot of the time as you try to afford new upgrades for your car and Max himself. Camps are your best source for passive income, but they're also the hardest thing to beat, and in order to make yourself strong enough to beat them, you need scrap. So you tend to have to grind out quite a few of these other low-yield scrap locations just to get to the skill plateau so you can start climbing for the next plateau. It's a tough but at least respectfully demanding loop and doesn't really let you cheat your way into the game's good graces. The only real way to shortcut this rhythm is to get lucky and find a scrap truck to deliver back to your home base, or get caught up in one of the storms and have enough armor upgrades to survive the storm long enough to loot all the scrap that gets kicked up during them. And if you can get past just how fucking many of these little markers on your map you have to visit for scrap, you'll be amply rewarded with some excellent upgrades. So there are two main upgrade categories, Max himself and the Magnum Opus. Sans upgrades, Max has a flashlight to help him see indoors, binoculars to mark faraway objects like Far Cry, a refillable canteen he can drink from anytime he's on foot to regain some health, and a pretty decent map that'll let you set markers anywhere on it, and the path will conveniently appear on your mini-map for you to follow, which is always nice, especially when there are so many objectives to choose from. All these little touches make Max feel like he's using whatever he's found to make the best use of his situation, and you really feel like a survivalist as you're just hoping for a nearby water source to fill your canteen if you're taking a beating, or maybe you just use your crowbar to crack open a chest for some scrap that you desperately need for an upgrade. Max starts off really weak, like taking 10 punches to kill an enemy weak. But once you get the scrap you need, you can turn Max into a fucking war machine. Max's combat system is incredibly similar to the Batman Arkham games, with a light attack, hold for heavy attack to break blocks and shields, and a parry button that you'll be using quite a lot. Unlike Batman, who's incredibly agile, Max is a brawler who relies on haymakers to make his points. His animations while swinging are very weighty, and when he connects, his punches are bone-crunching. It's honestly incredible sound work here to make combat feel like you're doing incredible amounts of damage and really putting your hip into it. And once you start unlocking the higher tier abilities, you'd be amazed at how many you can chain together to make quick work of a crowd. You can parry a bad guy's melee attack and turn it back on him, and then can in turn trigger the ability to insta-kill that person with a melee weapon. And the same goes for if you stunned an enemy into a knockdown state with your bare fists. Other iterations include punching down a shield with your bare hands or finishing someone off with a shiv at the end of a melee combo. And let's not forget my absolute favorite, which is where you get to use Max's trademark sawed-off shotgun to insta-kill enemies if you fire it in close. It's fucking brutal when you get it going, and even more so when you do enough damage or take enough damage to activate Fury mode, a classic do more damage and slow down time mode. It's some of the most satisfying fisticuffs I've played, but it does take quite a while to get competent with and to overcome some of the combat shortcomings. What I didn't like was that, being as lumbering as he is, there are several confusing limitations to what Max can do and how enemies overload you with inputs in ways you can't really be expected to block. Quite a few attacks can't be cancelled out of. I've been told that you can't parry in the middle of a heavy attack animation, and that may be true, but I almost never used those, but was still getting hit because Max wouldn't parry and stop his animation, or wouldn't do a shiv finisher on someone no matter how many times I hit the button. There's a decent amount of input lag, and I think it's combining with some unclear rules on what can't be cancelled, so it's never quite clear whether you're the one misunderstanding what you're allowed to do or the game's just being a little janky. There's also quite a few times in the early game when enemies will attack you while you're already blocking another attack, sometimes two at a time, which is just impossible to defend against, and so you take cheap damage. And if you're not getting unfairly overwhelmed, the timing for the parry is already really specific, so you could be hitting the prompt when you see it and still get hit sometimes. It's just a bit loose. Now, I remember liking the combat in my first playthrough, but even I rage tweeted about it this time because I was so sick of dying. Then I loaded up my old save and found that my hyper upgraded Max just about couldn't be touched, so it was really just a case of upgrading him to account for how weird combat can feel sometimes, so you don't have to worry about it so much anymore. But yeah, man. There are tons of cool upgrades and combos and finishers, and a whole lot of customization options for Max, like his iconic biker cop uniform or letting his hair and beard grow out. It really makes you feel like the road warrior you are when you start kitting him out. The real way to get to the next level, though, is completing construction projects at the various bases you frequent by picking up parts out in the world just like you would scrap. These projects will refill your ammo or fully restore your canteen and many other insane upgrades anytime you come back. The ammo replenishment especially is insanely powerful because other than some random drops, for hours in the early game, you might have a maximum of one shotgun shell or a shiv or a thunderpoon or a sniper bullet for your car at any given time and be very under-equipped to deal with anything and make any progress taking over the world. This upgrade just makes you an action hero of sorts and shows you the power of replenishment. And if you like that, you'll love the car and its upgrades. Avalanche was a little nervous about making the car combat in the game as they had never done anything like it. Cars do spin out quite a bit, which is frustrating, and some of the Wasteland missions provide you with some of the worst controlling vehicles you'll ever encounter. And the camera has an annoying habit of automatically panning down at a diagonal behind the car so you can't quite see what's in front of you, and so I ended up getting caught on environmental objects quite a lot because of this. It's especially bad in the tunnels that connect certain areas and in races that you have to do for the story, when you're in tight, cramped spaces with a too tall camera angle, leading to lots of bumping into things. That said, as awkward as the driving can be, thankfully the world is often very accommodating to the way the vehicles handle, being wide open and often trying to keep you upright with generous physics, even when you careen off the side of a mountain.
Fire and brimstone, put the blower off! Go, 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 go!
The engine igniting for the first time as you leave strongholds is orgasm-inducing, and the engine running as you go just sounds great and feels great, especially on an Xbox controller. Interestingly, Avalanche introduces the idea of limited fuel in your vehicles much like the older games did, which makes sense in this world of constrained resources. I thought this was going to play a bigger role though, as you only have to refuel like once or twice early on in the game to make it to your destination before you can just start fast traveling around and never worry about fuel again. It's a really weird choice, and it's one I'm curious why it remains if it wasn't committed to. On the whole, I'm kind of sad that the game wasn't made to care about this more because it could have added some real tension to where you would dare to go. But on the other hand, I do wonder if it would have made things so arduous that you would begin to resent the gameplay loop instead of crave it, as there's already a ton of bloat in the world as is. I guess as it stands, I'm glad that I can just fire up my vehicle and drive for a while without worrying, because Mad Max has some of the most pleasant driving in an open world I've ever played. The depth of field alternating with the blurring effects when you boost just makes the world feel like it's in hyper-focused and immediate as you drive. It's honestly rather a serene experience to just zoom across the mellow wasteland. But of course, this being Mad Max, someone's bound to come for you eventually, and that's where car combat and the upgrade trees you need to compete in that regard come in. You can upgrade tire tread, handling, armor, your ramming grill in the front when you smash into other cars, how many times you can speed boost and how far, spikes to keep people from climbing on your car, and more, many of which increase the weight of your car. So you may like a different configuration than I do based on the handling trade-off that certain upgrades have, which is a nice touch. To be fair though, every time the car got heavier, it just got easier to control, and it helped reduce the annoying spin out that most of the cars do when they don't weigh enough, so I just put on the best and heaviest stuff and prospered. But the real fun fest is the car weapons. The default option you have is to just ram other cars and damage them until they blow up, and you'll be able to upgrade your grill to do more damage as we said, or even add spikes on the side to grind other cars into scrap. I did notice that the ramming option is kind of awkward though, because enemy cars rarely keep up the same speed, so you're not ever quite alongside each other for long. So you'll hit them one time, they'll bounce away and kind of fall behind you or zoom ahead of you, so you're never really able to keep up that cool rhythm of feeling like you're neck and neck and, trading blows with cars. If there's any big failings of the car combat, it's that ramming just isn't doable for very long. But thankfully, your weapons are there to make up for that. At first, you get a harpoon that gets progressively stronger and can pull down bandit camp gates or high up scarecrows at leisure, not to mention it can rip off armor of other cars or expose weak spots. You can also fire your shotgun from the Magnum Opus, and there are a few things more fun than ripping off armor with your harpoon and exposing the fuel tank of a car nearby and then shotgunning it into smithereens. It is so badass. You can even add a sniper rifle in the trunk of the car that'll let you take out snipers or explodable fuel sources from afar to reduce security at camps. You can add side burners that flamethrow away anything trying to get near you, but by far the most fun is the Thunderpoon option, which are just explosive javelins to shoot at other vehicles to make them go boom. All of these projectile weapons except the sniper slow down time too when you aim, so using them is a dramatic but precise and fun way to exact destruction upon those who dare to oppose you. So once you get Max to where he can kill enemies in just a couple hits, and you're able to upgrade your ammo capacity and replenish your shells and shivs and water supply, and get your car to where it can take on whole convoys by itself, the game really starts to come together, and you can start to see the fruits of your labor. And aside from the cars spinning out a lot or the combat feeling rather janky and clunky at times, the only other major criticism I would levy at the gameplay is that the game is way too chintzy early on with scrap allocation, which makes the climb to get more powerful enough to be effective actually far too long. The map is just way too big too, and spaced out with Ubisoft levels of busywork. In fact, this may be worse than almost any other Ubisoft game with just how many instances of the same type of side activity there are. There are only like 4 or 5 different types of things to do. The races really aren't worth doing, and stuff like pulling down scarecrows with your harpoon feels good, but it's not anything but an obligation after a while. Avalanche really feels like they mistook breadth for added value when they really just took a map that should have been about half this size and then split up all the activities into incredibly small pieces so that each reward you get is just not worth the trouble. It's not that I've truly minded feeling like I had to really work for the initial scrap, at least on my first playthrough, but this grind was felt even in the 20 to 30 hour range when I'd already been grinding for days. Now, some of that's self-inflicted, certainly, as you certainly don't need to go do a good 60 to 70% of the side missions to hit a threshold where you're kicking ass and having the most fun. But for completionists or people who just want to feel like they got the most they could out of a game, you'll find that there's just way too many fucking objectives, and a lot of weird glitches that keep you from doing a lot of the later missions to kind of complete each objective chain, almost like they got the least amount of attention and were indeed completed last by the developers. The Torch 'em All Wasteland mission where you beat up a boss and his thugs will be incompletable if you don't let the boss live long enough to spawn all the waves of enemies he's got available to him. There are also quite a few janky Wasteland missions, and if not jank, then the last vestiges of an objective chain like the scarecrows or minefields just stop showing up, even if you scout them out via the Ubisoft-like balloons that are supposed to reveal everything in the region. But almost like a difficulty spike, they start having to be manually found in a map this big, which is not a remotely fun proposition after I've already ground out 20 to 30 hours easy doing the lion's share of this objective chain already. So does Mad Max have enough structural flaws to overshadow the fun parts? I think sometimes it very much does. There's a bit of a catch-22 early on where you have to be able to get scrap to have any good abilities, and have to get that scrap most efficiently by taking over camps which require abilities you have to have scrap for. And that resource and ability deficit in the beginning 5 to 10 hours or so can be really dull unless you really pace yourself wisely and don't get too big for your biker boots. But like most things in Mad Max, patience wins out. Patience not to spam the attack button too much in combat and to realize that the parry is the most important thing here, even more so than in Batman Arkham games. Patience to get the scrap you need even if it takes an hour or more to get what you need for just one upgrade, but one that'll make your life much easier from there on out. There are some really good moments of feeling like you're surviving by using your harpoon to pull up a wrecked car and scavenge it for parts, or open up a hatch or container in the desert and hope to find a sniper round or a shotgun shell that you could use to get past a nearby camp's one troublesome defense, and maybe give you a chance to get inside and take it over even if you're a little bit underleveled. But in order to understand the question of whether Mad Max is truly underrated, we do need to take a look at its actual story as kind of the last piece of the puzzle. So let's get into it. Of course, spoilers ahead, so skip to here if you wish to avoid them. So, like we said in the intro, Max is on the run after trying to steal from Scabrous Scrotus, which, my god, might be the worst name ever bestowed upon a human being. Now, we can tell Scabby Scrotum deserves his horrible name because this guy literally kicks puppies. So Max avenges said puppy by promptly embedding a chainsaw blade into his frontal cortex, which you think would cap a bitch, but you'd be surprised in this game. Max tries to get his ride back, but finds that Chumbucket is there trying to scavenge it for parts. Max spares him when Chumbucket basically says he's Max's biggest fan from afar after the Scrotus fight, and that he's part of some prophecy, a saint in his religion of engine worship. Unfortunately, Max loses his OG ride to scavengers, but Chumbucket says he's got him covered, saying he'll complete his Magnum Opus car and satisfy both of their desires, Max's to be free of this place, and Chumbucket's to be part of this religious experience. Early missions have us dealing with various faction leaders to acquire rare parts to keep upgrading the Magnum Opus to its full potential, but of course our innocent parts problem means we inevitably get sucked up into other people's problems, doing errands in exchange for these parts, and meeting a concubine slave named Hope who's caged up by the faction leader Gutgash. She wants us to help her and her child out, and we have to kind of brush her off and can't really do much to help at this time as we're trying to bargain with her captor already. Now, fast forward past a couple dry missions that are just about acquiring new parts for the car, or opening up new areas, or talking to new faction leaders to get said parts, and we'll soon bump into the next major story beat inside of the faction leader Pink Eye's stronghold. Stankgum, one of Scrotus's lieutenants, has brought his henchmen with him to raid Pink Eye's stronghold for some reason. Then somehow, who should show up here but Hope? Out of her cage in a totally different stronghold than Gutgash's where she was 20 minutes ago. She almost gets free here, but Stankgum steals her away when he realizes he's beat. Okay, that was weird. Were scenes cut as to why she would be here, or are we just kind of operating on a first draft with no revisions kind of operation here? No clue, and the game just goes on. Max and Chum start looking for a V8 engine for the Magnum Opus to get to the Plains of Silence, and find that one is conveniently the prize at a racetrack at the very scary, very not good gas town up in the north.
Crow Dazzle.
bid you welcome to the Circle of Light.
The race coordinator, Crowdazzle, sets up the race we need to get the drug addict Tenderloin to join us as our required second, and he's such a fun, zany character that I wish we got to see more of. The same goes for the Gastown race announcer, the Outcrier, who's just a big personality and always fun to listen to.
Behold! What treasure is bestowed upon us from above!
He tells us that the prize here is not just the V8, though, but the concubine Hope, who is here because friggin' Stank-Gum is here defending his title as Gastown's race champion. Well, that's convenient. We gotta get him, I guess, right? Too bad he's rigged his car to blow, and we have to kill him before the bomb goes off by shooting it with explosives. How don't explosives blow up said bomb? What in tarnation is going on here? This nonsense aside, this race was actually the bane of my existence the first time I played. I could not seem to keep up with him to take him down and never had enough resources like the Thunderpoons to get him dead. Plus, the cramped track often meant I was constantly getting stuck on stuff and being unable to turn around and get back into the race. I almost quit here during my first playthrough, but somehow, despite doing the bare minimum to upgrade my car just to progress the story this time, I got through it in 4 tries. Am I good now, or was I just awful back in 2015? God only knows.
What a wonderful philosophy you have.
But yeah, once we blow up Stank-Gum's vehicle, he somehow doesn't die. And then we get a really cool homage to the Thunderdome, down to the 2 men enter, 1 man leaves chant from the movie. So for some reason, part of the race is that you have to fight the second to the death as part of the winning. I mean, we went through all this trouble to get her on our team, and now we're going to kill her? Yet another okay then, but at least this part's a good homage, even if it is incredibly straightforward as a boss fight. We then get our last major what the fuck moment, as upon beating Stank-Gum and Tenderloin, who should show up to exact vengeance than Scabrous Scrotus himself, somehow just rocking that chainsaw blade in his forehead like a cool accessory. He beats the living shit out of Max, who only escapes with the help of Hope, who just can't get enough of your rugged Aussie musk for some reason. Max is a lucid dream where he's all up in Hope's business, which I'm still scratching my head on. They've done nothing for each other yet, and yet the script keeps acting like they've got this reason to be together. And when you awake after a blood transfusion from a war boy, Hope asks you to repay her by finding her daughter Glory, who's been sent off to the mines nearby. We journey into a really creepy abandoned airport where sand is poured through every orifice, kind of like Dubai looks in Spec Ops: The Line. It's moments like these that I wish the game leaned into more because they're so tense with anticipation. There's actually one scene I skipped over earlier in the story that I think takes place in the same airport, and both times it's just super tense. So once we get through this haunted house of an airport, we find the horrifying, unchained, Tim Burton or Henry Selick-esque adult baby that is Glory. This squirt just looks like she's Jimmy Neutron's 30-year-old sister or something. And when we bring her back to her mother, Hope, she looks older than her mother and more run down. It's crazy how scary this character model is when nearly all the other ones are either decent or exceptional.
What is that? What the fuck is that?
But Max doesn't have time for hot redheads, and soon he has bigger problems. Chumbucket's missing, and then we get a hilariously contrived, "Be a family with us and stay," from Hope, who seems to know something about this script that we don't, like where she and Max have like anything going on.
Stay with us. Make a life.
No, I don't think I will.
And when we find Chumbucket, we find out Scrotus tortured the poor son of a bitch into telling him where Hope and Glory were, and we rush back to the stronghold we just left to find them both brutally murdered. Max utterly snaps, and he drives off like a bat out of hell to catch up to Scrotus for revenge. I know some fans find this ending kind of poor, but I think it's got its strengths, so let's check it out. The way it plays out is that once Max disables the convoy and knocks Scrotus' rig almost off the side of a cliff, he makes to drive the Magnum Opus over and knocks Scrotus off the ledge. But Chumbucket can't stand to see his creation destroyed, so he jumps on the hood and refuses to get off. Max can't let Scrotus get away, so he drives the fucking car right through the rig, Chumbucket and all. I've heard fans bitch and moan that this was lame and shouldn't have happened, and to some degree, yeah, I think him dying is pretty lame, as he's really likable. But all of Max's best stories are tinged with tragedy. He doesn't really ever seem to be able to take anybody with him. There's no such thing as a win-win situation in this world. Everything comes with a price, even when you do the right thing. So while Chumbucket's loyal and helpful, he's also kind of that way because you're doing something that he's interested in. You're a saint to him, which obviously isn't real. He's out of his mind and far too attached to some bullshit prophecy that only he seems to know about. So to some degree, it's kind of the only way this could have gone if this was the situation at hand. But anyway, with all of our friends dead, we have nothing to live for except making Scrotus pay. What I will say is that Scrotus surviving us running our car into his rig by jumping off the back and our interceptor that we thought was broken makes Chumbucket's sacrifice feel pointless. But this aside, we do get a pretty okayish two-stage boss fight where we blow up our car enough with harpoons to again get the bastard out on the ground where we can fight him mano a mano. And this time we pull a saw blade out of his head and it kills him. Call me crazy, but I don't think a chainsaw blade to the brain is like leaving an arrow wound alone where you just don't want to tear up what's inside of you so you leave the arrow inside someone. You goofballs. It's his brain. Oh, jeez. But this old spiky crotch ornament man now dead, we take our car back and ride off into the sunset with a picture of our family on the dash. We've done our best to stir up our cold, dead heart, only to have it broken yet again. Okay, so that was a decentish Mad Max story, right? Certainly better than Beyond Thunderdome. Numerous plot holes aside, and the feeling of somehow being short but also rushed does make it a bit less memorable. Hope feeling forced in as the love interest, people jumping around from place to place for no reason, feels like some serious cutting was done to the final script, and yet, like one Redditor commented, it still kind of feels like a first draft. There is a very George Miller-esque economy to the whole thing, though, and I think Mad Max's characterization is pretty strong. He's never been this gruff, as Mel Gibson's portrayal was usually more aloof and only occasionally lashing out, but this Max is livid, torn up, and much more in the vein of Tom Hardy at the beginning of Fury Road, although of course Tom Hardy also kind of faded away by the end of that movie, whereas Max takes center stage here. So while I can't say this story is particularly great, it's definitely honoring the tragic tropes of Mad Max's best stories, and I have to applaud the attempt, even if it is a little bit rough. So now that we have the actual story under our belts, we're finally equipped to tell whether Mad Max is truly underrated as a product. I think this term is almost inextricable from Mad Max the game's legacy, what little legacy it does have. Underrated is an overused term these days. It gets used to describe just about anything that people like less than you do, even hardcore classics, and it becomes kind of its own hot take. Underrated's dictionary definition is not rated or valued high enough, and to underrate something is to underestimate the extent, value, or importance of something. So how does Mad Max's reception line up with that definition? Now, I don't pretend to hold Metacritic to any objective standard. The critics are known to misuse their powers. See IGN fucking over Prey and Alien Isolation, for instance. But Metacritic is a decent control to get an idea of, what are people thinking about said thing. And Mad Max gets a 6.9 on there. Holy shit. I had sort of pre-written this section in my head that Mad Max was rated just as highly as it should be in the, 7.5 or so range, a low 8 if you're feeling frisky. It manages to capture the Mad Max fantasy in its own no-frills way that would make Miller proud. It kind of feels like a Garth Ennis Punisher game too in a lot of ways. Gmanlives experienced something in that same vein as well, as his second playthrough really brought the game to life for him as a dream come true for a Mad Max fan.
And while pretty much every open world game uses the same formula of taking over outposts, unlocking fast travel points, and collecting a metric shit ton of resources, there was just something about the way that Mad Max's environment is constructed that just made the whole thing feel way more immersive. The whole mechanic of having to drink water to restore health, ammunition being incredibly limited, and then this really visceral, violent melee combat, where you could pretty much hear individual bones crunching with each blow, like it just set the whole thing apart. Along with, of course, just all of this chaotic vehicle combat. And I think that's the problem, is that you've really got to approach this as a Mad Max game, and not just another open world title. Because when you approach it from that angle is when you really start to appreciate just how impressive the whole thing really is. Plus, it's always just been hilarious to me hearing characters in video games with Aussie accents.
A shot at the bigs could make a bad girl right.
Where is she?
Out back.
Sounds pretty good, right? And I'd agree with quite a bit of that. Engaging Mad Max on its own terms is tantamount to enjoying it. But sometimes that search for the simulation of our Mad Max fantasies is all that's going to keep you going until you get to the next fun thing. And I don't think we should be wary of how many times Mad Max's excesses get in the way of that fantasy and why it may have driven so many people away. One of my favorites is this incredibly low 50 rating by Dark Zero, which says there's too much to do and no open space to breathe. Are you fucking kidding me? There's one whole area on the top right of the map that's basically just free-ranging dunes with almost nothing there. And the average 5 minutes of gameplay everywhere else is about 3 minutes of zooming along looking for stuff to run into. There really couldn't be more time to soak in the sights, and that's honestly a major reason to keep coming back to the game. I don't joyride much in open world games, but this one is a joy to ride in. Then the reviewer goes on to describe how mindless the combat is when you can just button mash. Wrong again. You have to parry far too often in this game to just spam the attack button. Queuing up too many actions will leave you vulnerable, as will not realizing the weight of your attacks may leave you vulnerable as you swing too hard into a crowd and can't just dodge back out. Now they rightly assess that this game is too indebted to the grab bag of Ubisoft busywork, but that's about all they get right. And there are quite a few reviews hanging out in this same vein, like a lot of sub-60 scores that pull down the weighted average against the actually quite a few 9 out of 10s that you see on here as well. That's a pretty big spread. So I'm feeling out my overall impressions with you kind of as I speak. So is Mad Max actually underrated? If Metacritic is anything to go by, there's quite a spread. Lots of 80s and 90s, a good smash of 70s, and a surprising amount of sub-60 scores, supplemented by the nearly 80 score by fans, which usually how these things go. It's a game with a lot of really good touches like Max's shotgun, the harpoon, some really powerful feeling brawler combat, and a consistently great look and feel to everything. So is a nearly 7 out of 10 good enough of a rating for this game? At first I balked at this because I thought it'd just be higher, but I'm inclined to think that this is about the definition of a 7 out of 10 game. I don't think Mad Max is truly underrated except by a very small subsection of haters, like Dark Zero. Honestly, a couple people here that I think are overrating it by putting it in the 9 out of 10 category, a fair few who represent the middle, and some weirdo outliers that probably smell like wet farts. I don't know, I just have a hunch. And then the fans bring it home like they always do, giving it a solid 8. Max is a good time, but it's also a fucking chore when it wants to be. But if you think I'm being too hard on this one, let's hear from my buddy Deadforge, who has a slightly more optimistic take.
Is Mad Max underrated? You know, it was a well-received 7 or 8 out of 10 game. It sits around a 69 on Metacritic, if you care about things like that. Critic ratings are like millipedes that pop up around my house in the summer. They exist and you take notice at times, but ultimately you just ignore them. Mad Max is a well-received game, as I said, yet it still feels like an underrated gem. Why is that? I can't say for sure, but it may just have something to do with many writing it off due to its Ubisoft-esque nature of game design and those middling reviews. If you crouch down under the beautiful apocalyptic night sky and run your hands through the sands of this barren wasteland, you'll feel a tinge of life running through the grains of that very sand, as if it was blood through veins. That's what makes it a diamond in the rough, the heart and commitment to authenticity within this world. Mad Max feels more alive while simultaneously being one of the most barren yet beautiful worlds you've ever seen. So is it underrated? Well, I think it just might be. It's for sure a must-play and at times an extremely heartwarming and even heart-pounding adventure about losing it all over again, and whether or not you should keep on fighting when the odds are never in your favor.
I think I can mostly agree with Mr. Deadforge here. He is right to point to the vibes being what really sells this one in the long run. It's not that its gameplay loops aren't satisfying, but there is something sort of life-giving about hearing that engine burst to life and hearing it whir powerfully and steady as I go. A sense of freedom and hope in a world that desperately wishes to constrict both of those things. So I don't think Mad Max is truly underrated, at least by the numbers if Metacritic is any type of control for our thought experiment. But underrated as far as rated pound for pound, I think Mad Max is rated pretty fairly. It is kind of the definition of a 7 out of 10 game. I think there's definitely obvious reasons why it wasn't well received as it could have been, still even to this day. Even a stan like me has to admit its shortcomings. But I'd be remiss if I didn't give the game its flowers and recommend it as one of my pet open world games. Hey Blondie adds a little bit more here about the deeper value of Mad Max.
Mad Max is my reminder of how potent personal experience can be to enjoying video games. Connection is important with any game. You either feel it or you don't. For many games, this feeling is born from gaming experience, comparing one game to others. On rare occasions, however, a game reaches into the past to gently tug at fond memories of simpler times, grounding the setting and selling its fantasy with an effortless indulgence. Mad Max, or rather the inspiration for its setting, is a connection to my childhood, a nourishing oasis amid the scorching, featureless sands. Despite my obvious bias, I believe that Mad Max stands on his own feet. He's the tattered Batman of pugilism, borrowing combat elements from the Arkham series and twisting them to his brutal survivalist persona, to gratifying effect. Vehicle combat is thrilling, and exploration rewards curiosity with clues about what this harsh place once was. Max is the shadow that modern gaming sees when it squints at the rearview mirror. Rather than blurring into the distance with time, Max has become bolder and more defined with each passing year. gaining upon modern gaming with a tight-lipped grimace, white knuckles guiding his Magnum Opus back into gamer consciousness. Mad Max's setting was a connection to my childhood, which elevated an already memorable experience. One day, Mad Max will be someone's connection to their childhood. Legacy is a powerful force and will ensure that Avalanche Studios' Mad Max will never be forgot.
Yeah, man, that's kind of how I feel. I'm a little cooler on the experience the second time around, there's no doubt, as it's far shorter than I remember, but it's no less nostalgic for a simpler time in games, even if it was one kind of affected by the Ubisoft bloat that has ruined quite a few games in the modern era. Is it too simple and by the numbers, too accessible at times? I mean, probably. But for those of us who just wanted a Mad Max game that lets you do a lot of the cool shit you could do in the movie, just maybe not as much as you'd like, you could do so much worse. It's hard to beat the joys of humming along the dilapidated Australian desert, the sun slowly setting on yet another failed attempt to reignite your broken down heart. But such is the life of the road warrior, the Wasteland legend, the man we got instead of the hero we asked for.
He lives now, only in my memories.
Thanks for watching! And a huge shout out to those of you generous enough to support my work by subscribing to my Patreon. I have to thank Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, He Act Show, and M for their contributions, and a special thanks to the Nth Review and James Wyatt for subscribing to my Patreon's highest tier. If you'd like to be part of the reason this channel gets bigger and better, feel free to go over to patreon.com/highfunctioningmedium, or you can become a YouTube channel member, or if you prefer, you can donate at Ko-fi. Also check out my GOG and NordVPN affiliate links to contribute to the channel with no cost to you. God bless you everyone, and I'll see you soon.